We're on the section starting with buffers. Our first recommendation is Game and Fish should review and update the 300-meter buffers to ensure there are no errors based on known infrastructure. Okay, so Craig.
Well, before Craig, I just want to say I paraphrase this a little bit for Craig, but put in the document that you all have, you saw a footnote that kind of contextualizes a little bit more information. And then, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jasmine, I think there's something there, yep. You and Craig your recommendations are very similar in the intent, so maybe we talk about them together and you guys can both explain what you're working with here.
And we did have some talk about that earlier with respect to the questions that were handed to Game and Fish earlier. So I think we did get some clarification on that, but we'll turn it over to you two.
No, I mean, I would just start, but there's a lot of words there from our environmental group that basically just there's known infrastructure in the area of the mines and I just mentioned our mine, but there's some with Big Island mine too, that there's known infrastructure in the buffer zone. And you know, I think the ultimate answer for us would be to carve that out, that it's there, we know about it, and it's not in the corridor. Because you know, on both our West Vaco side and our Granger side, the evaporated ponds are in there, and we know the Antelope don't have anything to do with them, and probably stay away from them intentionally, but just because they're so alkaline. But if we were to want to do a project in there and it was in the corridor, you know, something just to, I can't think of a good example, but to fix the pond or something, is it going to cause unnecessary red tape by that being in the corridor? And maybe not, but because it's in a low use area, but just, we know it's industrial infrastructure that's in place and could we carve it out? So that was kind of our intent.
And it's existing, correct? So
What's that?
it's existing.
Yeah.
So that would.
So, yeah.
I certainly understand where you're coming from, and we've talked about this, and it can be a major workload, but if that's something you want us over time to try to carve those out, we certainly could. It should be your recommendation, or we can do it on a case basis when a project comes up and we see there's overlaps or something, we can try to redigitize it at that time. It's whatever your flavor.
So I'm wanting everyone to be sure they're kind of understanding this, and so so with the infrastructure that's in the corridor, which is within that buffer, if there's infrastructure in there, or if something is in the corridor, depending on what level of use it is, right? High use, low use, bottleneck, whatever, that would trigger, I hate that word, but that would signal that there needs to be a conversation with Game and Fish because it's in the corridor. Am I tracking this so far? And so it does that within the corridor itself, if it's in the low use, it would just compel whatever company to say, we have a valid existing right here, but we want to do this. This is in the corridor. So according to the policy, we have to talk to you about it. We think, you know, that's what it requires. But once you have that conversation, it may or may not result with development not happening in the corridor, right? I mean, that's what the conversation would be. So if it was a project that would actually be better to occur within the corridor because there's already infrastructure there, or there's already some disturbance that happened, that is a possibility. It wouldn't always have to be cited outside that corridor, just because it's, I guess, there's no infrastructure within the corridor. I don't know if that helped, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands what we're talking about with this buffer and what it actually.
Excellent. Yes, we can decide where we decide or recommend oversight based on those circumstances that not just be for you or for the.
Mr. Chairman, with regard to projects that require like a state permit and so forth, that are presented to us to review. We're going to review them, you know, for overlap ensure compliance with the executive order for migration corridors, sage grouse, as well as, other habitat concerns. And so in a situation like that, where you have a valid existing environment, for maintenance and types of activities, development, if you have a right of way, perhaps from the beginning, or if it's on, private lands, then it's not, it's compliant with the EO. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I mean, yes.
I would say that, when you start looking at the corridors as a whole, and I thought Jill's example earlier today that, her home is covered by the corridor is a great example of there, because of those buffers, so forth, there is overlap with something that is, there's no antelope walking through or living in the shore, so.
Just want a wall.
So we have those situations, we have like a laydown yard that exists for oil and gas, right? Where it's totally within the corridor, but it's got fencing all the way around. How did that become part of the corridor? And it is that buffer. That buffer, I think, as the science of migration ecology has evolved, I think most of us, and certainly the department, are very convinced that that does an adequate job of protecting the habitat while still trying to capture an area that's going to provide that buffer from disturbance and so forth to allow these animals to continue to use the routes that they are.
So my comment was similar in nature, and I took a look at some larger projects throughout, so not just the Pinedale and Pine, but I'll give you kind of two examples. But the concern is that it could be misunderstood, the buffering area, right? When you have those layers. So not so much working with game and fish or the state of Wyoming, but the federal government's view and how they have been using GIS data, right? And we saw a lot of examples of that with sage grouse. They even used the wrong species in some of their information that they had received, right? So I guess the concern is around how the federal government will look at that. And so even though it's Jill's house that's covered and they maybe don't have access to it because maybe her yard is fenced, it's maybe there are some projects to carve out. And not everything. I think that would be a ridiculous undertaking, but maybe there are some of them throughout that warrant a little bit more of that. So maybe if it's more of a high use, or if it creates a narrower pathway than what it looks like from Antelope Head. So when I looked at down south at Opal, that was medium use, which isn't really restrictive, right? But if you took out Opal, the pathway for the antelope was narrower, it was smaller. And maybe that's worth noting, because if you have an extra need to expand Opal or the next generation of facilities, like what's happening with AI or data centers, it would maybe help you. You're going to look at all the layers, right? But in it, a lot of the grants are given. Maybe they don't look at it in the same way, and so making sure that narrowness is observed. The other thing I had was we have a bottleneck in our area, and it's not someplace that we would think of expanding or building, but there are 2 injection wells there. You don't usually put new activity next to injection wells, so that's not the big deal. These injection wells are really small. Their footprint really small, but they are fenced out. If you took them out of that bottleneck is even narrower, maybe more significant. And so maybe you give that one that way by not having it look so wide. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
But not everything. I know that there's no way you can do everything, but maybe taking into some considerations the larger facility structures, like those two ejection wells have been there almost 20 years, right? You know, the house been there forever. There are a few things out there that and I don't know how you would get at what is worth looking at. You have a list.
Commissioner, we're open to any recommendations.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to once again rationalize this in my brain because I don't have 100% understanding of the buffer zones. Had a great conversation with Jasmine the other day about this and she described the situation. So getting my hands wrapped around this much better. But I think from my perspective, when this concept was originally brought up, that the idea of partial designation, the basic reaction of Game and Fish was that by modifying the corridor, you would be changing what the scientific study is. And so my assumption, having talked with Game and Fish after the fact with respect to just that concept itself, was that the science itself lends itself to the buffer zones being where they are. And that, as we'll describe, in most situations, it would be site specific. You would be going back through these, and if there were an issue, it would be something that would be discussed at that time. The issue then becomes what Jasmine was talking about. We don't have any idea what BLM is going to do 5 years from now, but I'm not sure that we can project that. I think we have to look at what we're doing currently, trying to come up with a recommendation at this point in time. And I'm not sure how we value that information as to what happens to BLM. We've all seen what relationships can be with BLM, and there have been some real issues there. But I guess I would like to hear the overall view from Game and Fish. If we were to try and carve something, does it change significantly your scientific data data with respect to the risk assessment?
I guess it depends on how big or what you're looking to carve out. I mean, height is off the film. It's gonna be a huge GIS undertaking, and we need to know our site board, what's the acreage of the footprint that you'd like to see removed. As far as the science, they're not gonna use it. No,
Trying to choose those areas with you.
that's, I guess that's where
You
we're.
almost would have to take like an inventory from folks or you open it up for a time period of like, hey, because this is so big, right? And looking at it down to that degree, only the users are looking at it that way, right? So like I'm a user, we looked at it from every point that way or hyper focused, right? So maybe you're able to take that into account. And I say that the last experiences over the last 5 years with the way BLM uses GIS have not always been positive. In fact, I would say that to the detriment sometimes for Wyoming. And we're getting out of that space, but a lot of misunderstanding of the information that our state provides to the federal government. And even through like, we've had lots of working groups, and I think that those are important and need to continue. But I do see the misunderstanding of that data happen.
I mean, another way you could handle it, but I don't know. You can do it definitionally. You could modify the definition of buffer and have a statement with regard to bottlenecks and other that they do not include, or the EO does not apply to things within that designated buffer for the use areas. that are subject to existing development or things like that sort of thing. That could be another way to do it that would carry the workload. But if you're doing the maps and would allow an applicant to come in and say, here's my project, this shows within X. A house happens to be here, therefore it's not, a house happens to be here, therefore it's not subject to the provisions of the others. Would something like that be another way of approaching it?
It would certainly be another way to approach it. I mean,
It's still additional work
yeah,
to make that explanation, but that could be another approach to accomplish what I think you're providing. That would change the workload calculus.
yeah. I think the other issue that I have is it can appear wider than it truly is used. With that frame of mind, right? If you don't turn all the layers on, or if you don't dial down far enough, or zoom in close enough, they won't see it. And so it is a very like visual exercise.
Is it something, Jasmine, that you could potentially, you and Craig, because you're both working within that concept, you work together with something to come up with a recommendation for definitions with it, or come up with something that might be a little more broad? That would work with it. Will.
Mr. Chairman, some experiences I can speak to in reviewing projects or compliance with the migration executive is with the realtor where it's been designated. And we have a lot of cases where, we look at those, there's been a few cases where somebody's proposed project is going to be right in the middle of stop building and high use, an area of a lot of concern. And so, given that, where the conversation goes next is looking at that telemetry data. And especially with the mule deer, there's a different technique that was used to identify those areas. And so to get a better understanding of how the animals were using that particular area, we'll look at that information if needed at that level. Usually it's not needed, but if there's a great concern and it results in us, working with the colony to move it out of kind of those direct lines, it's been beneficial. So from that standpoint, I would circle back and say, those existing features and structures around the railway now have valid existing lines. Those will continue.
Yeah, I think we understand that really well, Will, and I appreciate that. It's just how it gets used.
Yeah, there's certainly some uncertainty, and we'd be open to any recommendations you have in fact.
Thank you.
All right. Yes. Yeah.
On the point about Opal, that's one of the industrial zones we're looking at in this state. And the impact of this on the state's looking at that to establish those places, because that's established infrastructure already. So those are real discussions about how that impacts that and the drone businesses. Those are the world's leader in drone.
Right.
In the United States, there's the world's. And there's a reason, that's what pays the taxes in this state. And so when you talk about what this means to that whole thing, Opal has 28 pipelines, 28 coming out. And I can tell you right now, I drive by the plant all the time. The Antelope don't hang around anywhere near there.
Right.
Not even close. The Runaway Basin stuff that comes out there stays out in that middle in between, going back and forth. And so the impact zone designating some of that has got to be taken a hard look at as far as I'm concerned, and how that affects. Because we've already made the decisions, put that and allow that to be there in our state. And there's industry, F5 industry want to build around that impact zone right now. Not
It's a
talking
good
about
place
it,
to
not
be.
thinking about it, they want to do it now.
Well, and if you're trying to be responsible with the environment, like it's a good place to cite those, just because you already have infrastructure you already have, like you don't have to build a further away pipeline, you don't have to give water to the resource. You have all of those things, and so it's maximizing. And it's just coming, like, looking at that area. And it is just medium use, which is good. It just makes that medium use narrow because, or more narrower than it appears on the map, because they're definitely not traveling through Opal. So I think I was just looking at it from the, if I were a new industry and I were having to plan where I was gonna site something. And if I were working with the federal government. Because you would just be looking at adjustment with that buffer saying, oh, it looks like I can't do it there because of the way it looks.
Okay, I think we have got the gist. Let's go ahead, let's vote on the first, which would be Craig's recommendation. So Game and Fish should review and update the 300-meter buffers to ensure there are no errors based on known infrastructure. So to vote with respect to that.
Aren't they bringing something back though? I'm confused. Didn't you ask him to bring back something a little urged?
Well,
Yeah, like we were talking that way. You did ask us to.
that was where I was going to go
Okay.
with my number 3. And when we talked about that, I was going to make the statement that I'm just uncomfortable with it as it is currently written. And we haven't got to yours either. I would say the same for both of these recommendations. But I would ask, for you to come back, and that would be the purpose of making a recommendation of
A modified
the number
recommendation.
3
Okay,
in the vote. Did I answer your question? Like, all right, that's what we were trying to accomplish. It. Same thing, I would vote 3 again on the next, which would be Jasmine's recommendation for exactly the same reason. I think as it's written, we need to have a little bit more clarification. Our purpose would be, we'll bring it back at our next meeting after they've had a chance to look at potentially modifying this. So.
And I think I could volunteer to help you guys along with some.
Mr. Chairman.
Mike, hand.
Okay. I wonder, that as we're talking through this kind of brings back to before lunch and the recommendation that we struggled with that Commissioner Conley brought up about the impact. I can't remember how it was worded, but similar, right, to what they're looking at.
Correct.
Okay. I just,
RMP.
maybe,
The one-
I can't remember. It
The
was
BLM nexus in there's huge. Yes, sir.
I can't remember exactly how it was worded, but
Well, BLM, for example, in that area right in there, their drilling potential
there you
says
go.
it's 0 for drilling potential in that area. The BLM list of stuff. One of the world's largest turnout for natural gas has a 0 potential. Something doesn't match up with that.
Yeah, to me, there's commonalities in all 3. When we started trying to talk. Commissioner Conley's, kind of thinking of it reversed, like where there already is impact, impacts and how to not. Or maybe cluster around them or something. Similar to what I walked through here, maybe.
Okay. There's mine.
Especially after lunch.
Yeah. All right.
Canada. The other mic.
Other Mike.
I have a question, maybe I'll ask Jasmine and Craig. As some more, since they're really thinking about it.
Okay.
Oh,
If.
Yeah.
Just some things to think about.
Yeah.
And figure out.
So did we need to take a formal vote then on Jasmine's recommendation? Or are we just going to assume, since it was, I'm going to vote 3, that we're going to talk about it when they come back? I think we're fine with that. Okay. All right. Our next area is weather. And the recommendation was made, weather systems and migration timing are key to success of the corridor. So detailed research and monitoring of what does and doesn't work should continue. John, elaborate on that.
Well, I'll just use an example. If you take the bad winter of 22-23, we didn't get I guess the antelope didn't migrate in the normal time period that they say they do, or at least a big portion of them didn't, because those are the ones that got caught. And weather has such an impact, and migration timing has such an impact on whether this corridor works or not. That's where I'm going with it.
So more acknowledgement than you think, John, or we need to acknowledge the fact that
Well,
that, or
I guess. I don't, yeah, I guess it is acknowledgement, yeah. Cause I don't know that there's a lot we can do when it's Mother Nature related. This corridor is not gonna fix that.
I feel like this may fit in, after we've already had the discussion this morning, it kind of fits in with the conversation we're having about fencing, knowing like what's effective for certain types of weather and what, I guess is that we need to do different or better in times of those heavy winter years or things that strategies that we don't need to employ in lighter weather years. Is that kind of where you're headed about like, what do we need to know? I mean, we can't control the weather, but what we can do is better anticipate what we need to do.
Or I guess in monitoring, one of the monitoring things that would help is to know whether the changes we make to the fence structures because of whether snow levels or that, and we've addressed that already, but that would be one way of monitoring whether they have constant fluid movement to keep able to get south. See where they do get balled up because of weather. And so I guess there is a certain amount of monitoring that we have to do in order to see what's working.
And I think what we're finding as we go through a lot of these recommendations is they may relate back to another topic that we've done in another area. So, I think we all understand what you're trying to say with respect to this, that, once again, acknowledging the fact that weather is a huge factor. I'm not sure how to structure that
Well, and it
with respect to the
kind of
recommendation.
fits in with the idea of how do we know that corridor designation is doing what we want it to do, which is preserving these long-term routes. And so I think some of that fits in there too, for sure, because with, evaluation of the corridor, they may figure out other places that need a project that would help, whether it be fencing or better habitat or whatever, water, I don't know, landscape, what doesn't work,
Yes.
I think fits in with that.
This might sound super silly, but we don't have, like, aside from the airport, what grabs weather data for here? It's like, so if you were to add, inches of snow, are we able to look at that? Does that come in anywhere? Like inches of snow on the mesa, inches of snow down in Carson, like, is that kind of where you're going
Well,
with some of it?
it is, and I guess it is probably something that is probably hard to do on a consistent basis. But I feel like there's a lot of pressure to get this corridor listed because of simply what happened in 20 and 23, 22 and 23. There's a lot of public pressure that thinks by getting this corridor designated, it will fix that. And it won't. If it's a Mother Nature issue, it won't. And that's kind of where I wanted to put that in there because it needs to be expressed, it needs to be known.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for everyone to understand the concept of the corridor at all. Then you throw in the complexities of a winter like 22, 23, which is so far outside the norm. But I think what we're trying to do is look over time and the functionality of the corridor in normal years, you know, because I think as you say, in that winter, I'm not sure anything would have taken place. And if you get a winter where the snow comes really early and no one anticipates that, and the animal gets stuck, you know, no one can do that. But I think we have to look at, or we don't have to. I think the way I look at it is simply that we're trying to look over time, these changes that we're trying to make and the recommendations that we're trying to make, are they going to help in most years? And I think that's, you know, once again, that's how I'm training. So. Go ahead, Mark.
The other weather related approach is whether is in the application of the preclusions. And during certain weather conditions, the shoulds become softer or not. That could happen. So I think it's more than just there's the ability to apply the differentially depending on timing, antelope movement, whether driven or otherwise. So I don't think it's limited just to make sure we know what's happening. It's also, are we doing something that makes sense real time in light of these weather conditions?
Yeah.
And it seems to me that since Sarah's working on the evaluation review assessment paragraph, the critical part with that is identifying the things that you definitely want to have measured. Because otherwise there's the opportunity to go and work them. And there's a number of things we've talked about. This is just one of them. So we may want to identify as topics for tracking and evaluation in that recommendation, Sarah. So maybe we could, that's another way to, or another place to look at trying to incorporate and address some of these considerations. Now, that we're not going to say research movement period track, but guidance as to what factors are we think are relevant to measuring effectiveness, not only the designation, but my perspective, its application by game and fish, and maybe we can utilize that portion of the recommendations as a way of making this point or addressing at least some of it. Yeah, that probably doesn't make sense.
Sarah, are you comfortable with that and adding it in that manner? And John, does that satisfy your recommendations?
I would just have to make sure to get with Game and Fish on this, so it kind of tiers to what them and UW have the ability to.
Okay, so I think we'll try and handle it that way. I don't think we need to vote with respect to that recommendation now. And we will move on to section 3. Recommendations for consideration of socioeconomic impacts to county and state revenues, jobs, and proposed current events. Under collaboration, while maintaining the importance of the pronghorn and pronghorn migration, remembering that they are sustained by multiple use communities. Dave.
Well, one of the things that, to me, that hasn't been mentioned in through here, the communities that are within our corridor areas that we're working on. We've got 10,000 people in Sublette County who live in this county for a reason, and they want to be involved in the outdoors and doing stuff along with it. So there are concerns as a multi-user, whether they're working here, whether it's recreation or just living. These things need to be taken in consideration when they're looking at the priority of the animal. So that's what I'm getting at.
And I think that's an extremely valid point from a county perspective. I would see the same thing. I think the only thing I would add to that is what I see designation potentially doing is just making the antelope somewhat more of a priority within those multiple uses.
And that's what I'm, we recognize, that's one of the reasons why we live here, but at the same time, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater either. So.
Any other questions for Dave? Okay, voting on that recommendation.
Actually, I do have a question.
Okay,
I guess, do we need anything like actionable from that? Or do you just want that to be like a statement of
A
consideration?
statement is what I'm looking at
Okay.
through here, we just, we can't lose sight of there's other things that are going on here besides the anthem. That picture. You know, we've got to think of our communities and what's going on here. But just to have that within it and as a reminder.
Once again, an acknowledgement, I think this fits well. Jasmine?
With the high use areas, so like with the mule deer, the closeout by the lake, right? And that's like a lawn, would something be like that in high use? Or could you, no ATVs, during these timeframes in high use areas, you just something closed off, the review closed out the area, public use.
That would come through. Are you referring to the ATVs just on public?
Just to see as an example, but like public access to the mall, so like with the mule deer one, the past 5 to 16 months, right? Like it's no human activity, so whether you're a runner or taking your dogs or biking or whatever, it's no public access for that short period of time. Are there places that would be considered in the high use, for example, that would be no public access?
Yeah, we've got places out by where I live on Half Moon Mountain, where that's closed until the end of April, you know, that's through there. With it, just because of the high use and what's going on with mule deer and stuff like this. Game and Fish has done a fantastic job of being able to have the areas closed in. And for the most part, as far as recreation vehicles I'm aware of, you know, it's pretty well maintained and kept with as far as I know. But it's like the 1st of May opened up and every shed hunter in the world is out there right now going 9-0 looking for deer or antlers and stuff that you've got there. So yeah, it's no, I think they've done, we have our areas that are closed, we have our winter range. I think it's pretty well recognized.
We're able to effect closures on our commission plans. We can direct that, but as far as the BLM, that's some of the travel and certainly we provide comments during those planning stages for winter range or in this case, we go through that.
So I'm thinking then a statement, something along the line of the fact that we want to recognize the priority of the antelope, but also we have to recognize the fact that we're trying to manage for multiple use.
Right.
So can we look at doing that as a statement, do you think, along with the other statements we're doing, rather than trying to make this as a recommendation? This, kind of hard, I'm seeing it as a recommendation, but I think as a statement, it would fit in pretty well with some of the other things that we've addressed. You okay with that, Dave?
I'm okay.
Let us work with that for the next meeting then, and we'll just move on from that. We won't actually vote on that as a recommendation. We'll just work to try and incorporate that as part of our statement. Okay. Second, the Game and Fish should recognize that the corridor takes precedence over development and quit allowing homeowners, developers the latitude to infringe on the corridor. Lynn.
I brought this up a couple of times previously, and unfortunately, the Game and Fish is stuck between what the state has said to work with landowners as much as possible. And then we take a look at the corridor, trying to keep everything running relatively smoothly. So we have you serving 2 masters, if you will. And that's just not fair. Game and Fish can only do so much. And when property owners say they'd like to expand or reduce the size of this corridor to allow a larger development for us, then Game and Fish says, listen to that, of course. And then it comes through to the commission saying, well, the Game and Fish doesn't have any problem with this, and therefore we don't care really what you want, Commissioner, because we already have the blessings. So this is extremely difficult.
Yeah, I think, this is another one of those issues, and there are some other recommendations later on dealing with county planning and those types of things. And I think that's a situation where it's incumbent upon us as we're developing our federal land use plans as counties to understand that we have got to work within the confines of what the recommendations are from Game and Fish on those types of things also. So I think as we get into those other recommendations, we're going to tap into this also. So,
And I'm just bringing this up for, informational purposes only, and there's nothing that we can report on in this regard.
okay, and I've done several things like that. I've just from conversations I had with other people, I wrote down kind of notes and put them in some of these that are, so I understand the concept completely, trying to make sure that we do talk about these things. So I don't think that we need to then vote necessarily on that. And I think we will get to it as we're talking about those other issues within the counties and.
And it's the same with the next one, Mr. Chairman, where we have, ranchers participate on a volunteer basis, and I totally agree. They should be grandfathered into what they have, or what they would accept. But in Sublette County, what we're seeing, on occasion, where the ranchers, segmenting them off. And subdivision coming in, and subdivision of abutting the Antelope corridor. Developing from there. At that point in time, do we say that that grandfather clause carries over to them, or do we take a look and institute whatever options we come up with in regards to setbacks, being friendly fence, controlling the dogs at large so they don't interfere? There's a number of things there that come to light as the West develops.
So,
Yes,
excuse me.
please.
With respect to that question of gamification, if that's the case, what types of conversations are you having in those situations where it's something like that, where you're seeing property that is being sectioned off or something of that nature? You're having those discussions.
Voluntary, we go through the village shop and that's part of the conversation.
And that's, you give your advice.
We give our
and the county
a recommendation.
Yeah, so basically there is the interaction between game and fish with respect to that, but that's basically what it's limited to.
Right. Again, it's just for informational purposes, but we can discuss it later. It's something that we see and it's an issue that's really important. And I suspect it's more about a county problem than addressing first.
And once again, I think there are specific recommendations later on that will address potentially rectifying that situation.
Something I would ask us to keep an eye on throughout this is the difference between grandfathering and existing use, which connotes a certain level of activity as well as a certain type of activity, and expansion of the use, which is impacts, which is what it is speaking to. Prior existing rights, if they're fixed and not subject to the right itself, allowing expansion may be very much the same thing. And I think that's a topic we need to be sure we understand throughout this.
Well, and obviously it makes a big difference whether we're talking about private landowners.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd like us to look at the body doing with those parameters in mind as we sort of next session.
Other comments? Okay.
Would just say, I mean, you've seen the executive order and how it's narrowly construed. To respect private property rights, and that, that's intentional. I mean, the idea is not to direct, and what can happen on someone's private land, so much, and so I think we have to, keep that in mind that, there may be something that you want to recommend with zoning, but largely the executive order is meant to hold private property.
Sure. Okay. On to the next, the participating counties planning and zoning should jointly meet and determine standards for the corridor and building development around it. That's again,
I don't mean to occupy the time before, but we had the opportunity to chat with you and Ms. Sara with the planning and zoning individuals from the different counties. And it was enlightening to me because Teton County has planned ahead because of their society there and come up with what they believe to be the best course of action for them. And that as we move south, Sublette County is way behind the curve. I know that. And Lincoln and Sweetwater County are probably we're triplets, if that makes sense, because we're looking at an item that is important. And at the same time, we each have our own struggles and what we're facing. And perhaps having a collaboration with the planning and zoning departments to take an overview and see what they can come up with and also input their expertise in this procedure with Castle.
Yeah, I totally agree. In talking with several of you, one of the things that became pretty apparent is there's been kind of an overarching belief, I think, counties all have a pretty good idea what one another are doing. And that's not the case.
Yeah.
So, when we have Teton County and their land use director presents where they're at with their federal land use plan, and we look at potentially what Sweetwater County's land use plan is, you can't compare them at all. And I have a couple recommendations with respect to the same type of issue, because I think there needs to be some more continuity with respect to how these counties are handling things within these migration corridors and things of that nature. So I totally understand your concept, and I think it's something that really we need to work with as counties to try and do a better job.
Recognize Sweetwater, I think it was developed in the future. And how do we make it so we have some sort of consistency in the procedure developed, hindering development?
I think this is one that will probably be paired with a couple of others maybe later on, but other questions with respect to it?
You know, we're being pretty unfair for the Commissioners Association.
If you want.
Yeah, it's certainly something that I don't think Sarah heard that. Jasmine said she felt like it was something that may be taken up by the County Commissioners Association potentially.
So one of the items, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, one of the items that comes in play is Sublette County. We're kind of happy in our own world. And I know that Teton County again is far more advanced than we are. Our last comprehensive plan was back in 2001. Do you think anything's changed since 2001 to today?
Just a few things.
And so we're not even prepared for a lot of what we're discussing, but we recognize the importance of it.
And that basically leads into what one of my next recommendations is going to be that I think we can pair with that. Good.
Just these topics fit real well into like education. You can just say education not necessarily limited to the general public. We've had a couple of things, whether it's funding availability or whatever. I think we might end up seeing a more somewhat robust information dissemination, education kind of set of recommendations that could address these topics. And for the record, I'm not waving the Teton County flag in terms of the perfection of what Teton County's land use plan is. We do our fair share of talking out both sides of our face. That's not limited elsewhere. So I'm not going to say you guys aren't as advanced. You may or may not be the rational.
Well, and maybe not as involved. We've not
Different publics
to be involved in.
and you have different publics.
So I'm rather than voting on that, I'm going to try and go to the next couple and then talk about lumping them together because I believe there's an opportunity here. So the next one would be Maggie's recommendation to convene a group of affected county planners to explore feasibility of and interest in voluntary amending county land use plans to align with the executive order. I think fits in very closely with what Commissioner Bernard was talking about. And then my next recommendation was governor encouraged updates of county land use and federal land use plans with advice from council which potentially could be funded through FNRPA, designed to make plans more consistent with the corridor designation. So I think those all fit very closely together. In talking with my land use planner after he presented to our group, one of the things that he brought up was he felt like seeing that inconsistency was something that he would like to address. And he felt like he's worked pretty closely with the governor's office, and he felt like the FNRPA funds would potentially be a viable resource. If the governor would be willing to do that, we could potentially hire an attorney to work for the 4 counties to look through and see if there are commonalities that would make sense for us to try and address for each of the counties and doing something like that. So that was what my recommendation came, and I think we can work those all together to come up with basically one recommendation that would cover all of that.
What's this question? That's.
Oh, and FNRPA is Federal National Resource Plan account.
I love acronyms. I don't know that one.
I'm sorry, it's an account that the governor has set aside for these types of issues. We've used it for coalition of local governments in the past. When we've hired attorneys that have actually worked for the counties on the BLM land use plan or the resource management plan. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, I hate acronyms too, so I sympathize completely with that. Meg.
I think it's just important that we keep the language pretty soft here because like, it's been mentioned, the executive order doesn't impact private lands. We're just trying to set some guidelines, some sort of, voluntary, a layout that folks can follow. So there's something that planning and zoning can look at and give folks that are looking to develop. Like, I think we can't make anything too solid with this plan.
Broader is better.
Broader is better.
Okay. Sarah.
Yeah, I agree. I think, but this is a great place to acknowledge, like, we do think that if you believe this, the local working group does believe that counties could make a difference if they, looked at the EO along with their land planning, essentially, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to get to. So I do think, broad recommendation there, if you believe that this will help corridor, that's definitely a recommendation for, county planners to consider. And then just a note on the FNRPA account, that is legislatively appropriated. And so the governor does have to put that in his budget and ask for that from the legislature, for the biennium or each.
Okay, so Sarah, are we kind of comfortable working group trying to put those things together into one kind of recommended? And I don't know, have you gotten that far along, Sarah, with your?
I do have a combined recommendation. Maybe says, but probably doesn't get it all the way because not what we can do a little bit more, but.
Yeah, I would say that pretty well fits the bill with what we're talking about. It's broader, Maggie. I think that fits that a little bit more. Any comments on that? I think we can work with that just a little bit. Mike.
Yeah, one thing, and it's wordsmithing, but it might be also, so the counties aren't the only ones that have land use and federal land use plans. Every conservation district within this corridor in the state also has them. And they're also publicly elected officials that represent natural resources in the state statutes. So it might be something here where those land use plans need to be looked at as well.
Excellent.
Did you say conservation, did you see someone else?
No, just conservation districts. And they utilize for their funding as well as counties and are authorized.
And I apologize because I actually did have a conversation with our conservationist. Tom and I had mentioned that and didn't incorporate that, so that's a point well taken. Okay, we can do that. The next one would have, and it falls pretty much in line with that, but I think it's important and I want to say this the most politically correct way, but I think a lot of times it's easy for some of our counties to not feel like they are as represented as others. And I think it's important that the governor speak with the boards of county commissioners of these affected counties. And I'm not sure how to necessarily address it most efficiently and most effectively, but I think it's important to have that communication line open and to identify the fact that we feel like it is important that line of communication does remain open. So I think that can be worded much better, maybe than what I did. Questions on it? Good idea.
It's just more open dialogue, right?
Yeah.
So you're looking for a little bit more open dialogue about.
Follow-ups on, you know, talking with impacts potentially if Lincoln County finds out, Kent finds out 3 years from now that we've designated the corridor and it's had a major impact on Lincoln County's valuation over the course of time. You know, I think those lines of communication need to be open. And I know that Kent would talk to the governor. He's got a pretty good line to get to that point in time, but Kent may not be there forever, or another commissioner might be in that seat. And I think it's important to have, once again, that line of communication so that you're talking about what's happened since the designation has taken place potentially. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the communication line is that, your thoughts on that? Was that from the governor's office or from state agencies implementing the EO? Both.
I think my thought was basically more in line with, my thought process was the governor. Because the game and fish shop obviously works for the governor's office. I think that he would have that impact. But I think it would be, my thought was directly between the governor's office and the board of county commissioners.
I think county commissioners would be their perspective. I think it's a governor's office function. The implementing agency is obviously maintaining communications with county staff. But then top to time, I think respects the nature of the office.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, we'll go ahead and vote on that. Those who are in favor? All right. All right, on to education. We have increased public awareness to limit human interaction during migration seasons using media, social media, and newspapers, etc. John.
That was mainly when in these subdivisions, Antelope and migrating season. If there was just a simple public notice that we would maybe put on social media on a regular basis, just to make the public aware that Antelope are migrating, just to make them aware of it so they can keep their dogs tied up or maybe not interact as much with them, hinder.
Is that something that's done at all, or is there?
So
Yes.
I would love to see, most visitors are using an app to get through our area. And I've never seen a wildlife alert come on, and I know that you can do it. So like we have point A to point B driving app for our field for all of our workers and contractors, and we can close a road. So we have a couple of areas that we close out for wildlife and we don't access, or it's limited access, and it shows up on their app on their phone, and then it talks to them through their navigator. I think it would be an easy thing to do that way too, for visitors coming through our area as a navigation awareness. We don't have that many outlets for local news, not everyone gets the newspaper, and so like hitting all the media pieces for those notices, I think is a great awareness communication. There are signs. I like to walk around the CCC ponds, and the sign was very prominent, and it told, like, it's very understandable. Like, I think if you were from afar, you were understanding what this sign meant, and you weren't gonna go there. Yeah, I like your.
Hey, Herman, White House been doing that ever since our elk herd has moved in down there south, down there by Monpos 55, and they've been on the highway, so they've been putting alerts where, at least on my app or my car and everything else, is telling me that I've got elk in the area, so I know it's available.
Yeah, just add it for the species.
I think, like Dave said, I think what's happening on the 511 app, they come up as a warning. And we actually, at one point, we tried to figure out if there's a way to interface with Google Maps. Because
Yeah,
that's what everybody uses, right? And it was incredibly challenging to try to make something happen with that. And that's why we went to the YDOT 511 app route. I don't know that there's a lot of awareness of, to get people to realize that that's out there. And it is something that is just seasonally there. Those warnings come on and off seasonally. So probably a lot more awareness could be made, and we could, I would say there's potential to improve upon that without a doubt. But I do think we've made some initial attempts with YDOT to do that.
Sounds like there could maybe be something that, I mean, as we were talking about tourists though, right?
Yeah,
Talking
and
about
I can
tourists
tell
that may
you,
not even have the YDOT app and stuff.
right,
It might be, yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of, boy, I could see the comms team getting together and brainstorming something like this a bunch to see how they could, the game and fish team can get something out like that and utilize the relationships they have with our sister agencies like tourism and YDOT and state parks and come up with, like, at certain times of the year, what can we do to make this message a little bit?
and the 511 is a great app. It's just amazing how many people don't know that exists. And I can say that about almost everyone in our Denver office, because we put it on our own website now. Because there were a number of people that were driving up here just from a weather perspective on I-80 from Denver to here. Like, that is a really important resource to have. And so maybe it's even getting the comms team to, like, make people outside of the area, or as you're entering Wyoming. I mean, there's 511 signs. I just don't know how much people are traveling it.
Like, and any results could be it. Doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be limited to antelope, it's a multi-species concept. You've got mule deer, other, I think that'd be great to get people to know what they're talking about what they do with information delivery.
What a great concept. All right, all those in favor of that recommendation? All right, next would be increased public awareness on the impacts of overpopulation of wild horses. I think we've talked an awful lot about wild horses, so I don't know.
And I do think, John, I think we combined an education piece with the earlier one, so.
Don't kill their victims.
It could be a picture for this.
All right, next, promote the corridor via educational kiosks and material through Wyoming Game and Fish, right?
Just given the opportunity for them to share the story. Like at the road pull-offs, like at the 55 or wherever. It was just really a general statement.
I think, once again, it increases the visibility. I think that's an excellent thing. Question with the priorities of funding to do those types of things.
So we used to have watching grants, and we're re-implementing those. So this would be perfect. And my question for you, I mean, in work I've done around the country elsewhere, when they say, how do you communicate most effectively with a rural private community? It's the conservation districts. And folks are more likely to call you guys than necessarily Game and Fish, I think, in many circumstances. Is there room for provision, integration of that kind of information outreach and using the conservation districts to make the information available to them as purveyors of information to their publics?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say most of the,
Is that already-
if not all the districts in this corridor already do share out a lot. We blast out press releases from Game and Fish and other, and stuff, and I know other districts do, so.
Already in place.
Yeah, I think it's in place. It's just, this was getting more to, Game and Fish, like the fence pack or book that Jasmine showed earlier. Conservation districts help pay for some of that printing through partnerships, and then we hand it out to landowners and potential land buyers to that. So I think it's just, obviously material developed through Game and Fish because they are the ones in charge of the species. And then, yeah, we're all about sharing.
You're the ones that are trusted.
Huh?
You're the ones that are generally trusted.
Well, yeah, sometimes.
General, it's easy for him to say, oh my.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions on it, comments? We can vote on it. Okay, on to section 4. On the education, did you combine anything there, Sarah?
With education, I did just sort of take a shot at one education combined rec, but I think I can do a better job because it's conversation, so I don't want you guys to look this. It's not ready yet, but then I take it back.
Nobody looked.
Okay, yeah, I think we can do a better job.
Okay. On to section 4, recommendation on existing protections and designation. So the first recommendation would be to utilize technology to develop oil and gas and minerals to reduce the impacts while maintaining revenue into the future. Mike.
Going back to like Lynn's comment of, a lot of things have changed in 20 years. And the way oil and gas and the minerals industry develops has changed. And so it's just promoting that technology and making sure that minerals, oil and gas and the mineral industry pays for most of what Wyoming is growing to minerals. So it's just a statement. Reducing impacts through increased technology while maintaining the revenue and the extraction of the resource.
Comments? All right, should probably vote. All right. We're going to get into some areas here that I think, not that I don't want to get into them, but I think it might be more valuable to go through some of the other recommendations to see how the other recommendations unfold before we talk about the recommendations, whether to designate or not. So if it's okay with the group, I'd like to kind of defer those until we've had a chance to look at some of the other recommendations. And then at that point in time, we'll have a better understanding of what those recommendations which we're going to move forward are going to be and how that may impact our decision, whether we want to just remain identified or whether we want to designate. Okay with everybody there? I think the next comment from Commissioner Bernard, I think I would put that into that category, Commissioner. I think protecting this to the fullest extent possible would basically be a statement that you want to designate.
Sure, I can piggyback on that.
Absolutely.
I apologize for my poorly written statement here. That doesn't really carry what meaning is behind that. When I listen to Game and Fish, as far as the priority of what to do first or how to address things. The problem that we have is feeding fishes understaffed, they're underpaid. State troopers are understaffed, and underpaid. We're taking a look at all of these action items to go to the governor, but the individuals that are going to be spending the majority of the time in game and fishing. Something I would like to include, just a statement in there that truly need help. Both. We got here. He starts laughing, and I'm not talking to him mental aspect.
You notice who we looked at when I said that.
I get it. But historically, the state has not valued feeding fish or our troopers. And in order to end up with quality product, these are the individuals that are implementing it. And for us to say, okay, we're going to now add this huge plate of spaghetti to what you're already serving. We're going to go on the other side of the state to take care of the problems. We haven't really fixed anything other than addressing it, making your life more comfortable. That's.
Well, and unfortunately, I don't think that getting into that is a big part of our charge. I think
Well,
that's,
but I'd like to back it up into the wild horses. They don't have to not necessarily the same, but these are the same people that are implementing goals. That's my opinion, Chair.
okay, so we'll go ahead and move on. The next recommendation was the corridor designation should be limited to high use and bottleneck areas. I think once again, we can come back and address that after we get through some of the others. Are you all right with that, Greg?
Well, I'll actually be gonna withdraw that one based on Jill's explanation of violence this morning and reading the room.
Okay. Well, we can do that. The next one is mine, and it was my attempt at making the designation, so I will wait until we have further information on it for everybody to look at it. The next one for Maggie would be basically, once again, on the full designation. The next one that we could talk about would be basically the dates of peak timing used for each segment can be adjusted on a case-by-case basis at the discretion of game and fish staff in response to conditions on the ground. Maggie.
I think this ties into what John was speaking about with weather earlier, and I think it's sort of an actionable item on just gauging what's happening in the current year and giving game and fish the authority to make changes based on the actual circumstances of what we're giving them. So that's just an attempt to give them a little more power in, years of extreme winter or no winter like we had this year, to sort of be able to have some flexibility in the dates when migration happens.
I would just ask, how does that fit in with game and fish? I mean, you've got the tables that basically show those timeframes currently. How does that fit in?
Yeah, I'll start. We have such an extensive data set to cover several mild winters and very extreme winters. And so that's how those dates were developed. Anytime we have any kind of timing, if we're gonna go and talk to the phone, we can have those conversations. And if things are open, we can allow things to proceed. If things are nastier, we're asking them to wait, so we can have those conversations. I get what you're asking, but those dates are pretty broad and cover both extremes. So you wanna.
I mean, I would say we're doing that to some extent now. We do have a few examples when we had a really early spring and we're like, yeah, it's fine to go in and get started now because the critters are all gone. So I would say it's not handled in a very official capacity. It's more case by case. One-on-one kind of discussions between local department folks and the project proponent, but we do have some examples of where we have incorporated that flexibility that I know we've done here locally with the building.
Well, it seems like the whole thing as a case by case basis. So I didn't know if it would be helpful to reinforce that, or if this is just like, no, it doesn't matter, you don't need to have that.
I mean, I think it's great to reinforce that, that's an important flexibility to continue to support that in the EO. I mean, I think that sort of recommendation was great to show that we want to continue to have that flexibility.
Thanks. Any other comments? All right, let's go ahead and vote on that.
This is us. Two, but one, two,
I think they were all ones.
any threes?
No.
Or fours?
I don't think these are fours. Okay, the next one. The Sublette Antelope Working Group will convene every 5 years or more frequently if deemed appropriate by Game and Fish staff to reevaluate the corridor, incorporating the latest, best available science and data.
I know we talked about this in the last meeting, and this is something that's kind of already incorporated into the EO. It just seems worth strengthening, because based on our last discussion, open to thoughts here.
The findings came from our last discussion, right?
And I think that was the timeframe that was actually referenced in the EO statement too, so.
The governor actually convenes this, not us.
Yeah, well, and there's some confusion, I think, and I would phrase this just slightly differently because it's not. I don't think the Sublette Antelope Working Group will reconvene. I don't think it will be this group. I think the governor will actually name a group like this to do it. So it might be beneficial to just state that a Sublette Antelope Working Group will be rather than the.
Just say add in heirs and the signs.
Yeah, so let me point to where this is in the executive order. So if you have your EO, it's on page, well, the page number is no page. It's the 7, but this is page 7 of whatever this whole thing is. So it's point number 8, and it says, in consultation with the affected county commissioners and tribes, an area working group of similar membership to that outlined above, which is us here now, will be convened within 5 years of designation of a corridor. And so what that means is in 5 years from now, a group made up of similar representation of landowner, industry representatives, conservation, will reconvene and they'll take another look at this corridor. And so the first time that the designation process has happened with our mule deer corridors, they had to come back within 2 years of that designation and make recommendations on refinements or changes. And so the last local working group process where those former reports and recommendations came from, that was after the corridors were designated, and that local working group came to take a look at it and make recommendations on refinement. So I think Maggie's trying to reinforce how important this process is and this piece of the local working group process. I think if I speak for just saying like, we've got this, the work that Game and Fish, we want Game and Fish to do to evaluate the corridor. That's exactly where that information will come in, is into this 5-year review. So we know that review is really important, and any refinements that need to be made under the next governor, whatever their charge may be, would happen at this time.
I think the issue with the executive order to me is that there's one more meeting in 5 years and that's it. And I think it's something that should be like an ongoing process, because like you guys pointed out multiple times, things aren't the same as they were 20 years ago. And things are gonna keep changing. We've got AI data centers coming. There's, challenges we don't even know are coming down the pipeline. So I think it's important that this is a constantly evolving and reassessment that happens every 5 years or so. So I think that's sort of more of what I was wanting. to-
So I see what you're saying. So in the executive order, it says they have to meet after 5 years, one time. But you're saying if this corridor is so important to us, we have to continue to meet 5 years, like 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
So perhaps the group recognizes and agrees with, supports the importance of that meeting and that it should occur every 5 years thereafter. This is a reference back to the EO provision.
Just a little wordsmithing, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying it's perfect as written, but I think it's important to keep, looking back at this, checking in.
Yeah, I think if this is something, and I do support what Maggie's saying, I think this is part of the drive of the governor that maybe this is not a recommendation under this designation, this is a recommendation to a change in the executive order.
Could potentially be.
I mean, I made a recommendation to continue with best science, and the way to do, is to circle back, and the way it's just 5 years, so this is so I could see that being a potential out of this group, of change to the EO, not a recommendation to the designation.
Thank you, James. Yeah, well, I think that's an excellent way to handle that, because I do think it fits well within the change to the EO to do that.
Want to apply it to the manager.
Sure. Not sure what Sarah's doing, so I'll wait for a minute.
Well, sorry, the projector may shut off, but it still might, but. Okay, so we're not sure if we want it to be an overall recommendation for the executive order yet, or I just have that note.
Yeah, so I would ask for the group, do we think that it would be a better fit to be a recommendation for an overall update to the EO rather than doing this as a recommendation? Let's go ahead and vote with respect to that and see what the group thinks. I would think that yes, it would be. I would say yes. So we will do that rather than making that as a recommendation. Okay, next we have consider establishing a memorandum of understanding between the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, Bureau of Land Management, Wyoming, and U.S. Forest Service Rocky Mountain Region to consolidate resources and coordinate efforts within the antelope migration corridor. This MOU can include, but is not limited to, directing resources for habitat improvement, fencing modifications, reaffirming valid existing rights, reinforcing the right and ability to graze livestock on federal and state lands, and addressing other conservation concerns within the corridor. Meg, wow, I'm impressed.
Hey, we talked about this already.
We did.
So this is sort of, it would be sort of a symbolic document that encourages relationships between state and federal management of lands and wildlife. We can't direct federal management, but this is sort of a way of making some cohesion with how things are managed within the corridor. And an attempt at cohesion between those state and federal management levels.
Comments? Dave?
I think it's a wonderful idea, but I would include for local representation, the county commissioner will be part of that group as we're looking at what's going on within their corridor. That they would be included in that MOU with what's happening within the county.
Do that, so the forest revision plan earlier, which means RMP, at the end of the piece.
I would think it'd be set up, and the agencies can't do anything they don't have legal authority to do. They'd have to make that decision with regard to different pieces of it. And at least talking about, I mean, MOUs, you can look at them as not worth the paper they're printed on because they don't have any with that effect. I don't agree with that, but it all depends on the attitudes of the people in office at the time. They honor it or not.
BLM, they do able for certain things, that's how they manage growth, and then it takes a Schedule A, which is two completely different processes to deal with each agency. With both tied BLM to their RMP, and Forest Service to Forest Revision Plan, which they both live and die by.
I think it's a wording thing. I mean, they've got it, they can't do it they haven't used their process to allow. But I'll say this says they should revise their RMP or ignore it. The notion of an integration at least gives you something to point to, say you guys are not paying attention to you to. And I tend to think it would be, the only downside to it is the level of time that goes into negotiating language. Because these get real complicated fast, but symbolically, it to me reinforces the whole notion of their communication.
And I think once again, I mean, it's a recommendation that I believe has some merit in doing that, but would fit within our purview. But it can't hurt anything to do that, I don't think, to try and make that recommendation. Then it would be up to whoever the governor is at that point in time to determine whether they want to move forward and see if that's something to do.
And if you directed the MOU to effectuate the implementation of the MOU, this recommendation probably shouldn't prescribe what it covers. I think Maggie's given some examples, that's why it can include. Yeah, it's a thing, but not limited to. Because every agency's been sacked and assigned to the thing that requires me to do something, my own laws and regs will allow me to. And that's reality. I think seeing how far you can get with a collaborative, memorializing collaboration. It could make anything worse.
Great. I mean, I agree with the concept and if it's more symbolic than anything, but if you indeed have to force those groups to get together, does it reaffirm your valid existing rights? It could add a year to a project. I mean, they just don't work well together. I mean, we have to deal with all those groups on anything we do. And if it's symbolic, it's one thing. If it's reality that we're forcing them to make decisions, that could be a problem.
Well, I don't think we can force them, so I think it would be symbolic, so I think it's trying to foster goodwill.
And the idea is that it would make the existing rates a little more straightforward. If, BLM is already recognizing this forward and what it does and doesn't do. It's the idea, and, even if it is just symbolic.
And Craig, my comment said absolutely nothing to do with saying they've got to all be involved in each and every decision. They each have institutional responsibility. We can't do that.
No, I understand.
And that would be it. They would never get on, so they would never get past the first meeting.
No.
All right, any other comments, Mike?
Oh, just some wordsmithing. We could either delete the region because they're getting rid of them, or at least call it the current. It's in the Intermountain, all of this corridors in the Intermountain region of the forest.
We went back and forth on it.
Yeah, region 2 is everything but the Bridge of Teton and the Ashley, which is what this it's the INTER.
And maybe this can have a focus on like.
But they might get rid of that and call it Wyoming.
That's about,
Yeah, I mean,
that's about to change completely.
All right, we're starting to get a little bit off with different people, lots of groups here, so. John,
I was just a thought here on that, like that directing resources for habitat improvement and some modifications. Can we change the habitat improvement to like range improvements so that it could cover water improvements? Because one thing about that I've experienced with the BLM, they're really slow on getting any water improvements approved. So maybe with another agency or a group like this, maybe putting a little pressure on it might help. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair.
other comments?
I would say, we have MOUs in place like the Petroleum Association of Wyoming has an MOU with ULN to help support if there are vacancies in jobs and things like that, so that things keep moving in third parties. And I think they can help each other if they are having issues or problems or shortage of funds. In theory, maybe they can support each other. If one agency and like that you're, sort of project base, like your habitat improvement pieces, modifications. So sometimes you get this huge fund that the federal government has, and maybe if these other entities know about it, they can access those funds instead of dealing taking a project that maybe takes a lot of dollars but has less impact. Maybe it's a space.
All right, we can vote on this one. All right.
Sounds like we might need to work on it a little bit.
Yeah, I think there were 3 or 4 twos there, so really wordsmithing might help there. I think we can get there. Okay, on to section 5. Recommendations related to highway projects, including wildlife crossing opportunities and other project considerations. I have got several things that I put in this section. And basically it was, there aren't a lot of things, reading the biological risk assessment, vehicle collisions are not really, have not really been a big issue that's been identified through the risk assessment and things of that nature. But looking to things in the future, if we were trying to potentially look at Interstate 80 or looking at possibly doing some underpasses or things of that nature, even along Highway 28 on the Green River side of Carson or something of that nature. I see the signs all the time with Antelope entering the highway at 55 miles an hour, things of that nature. I think some of those things were the reasons that I brought up some of these. Some of them are a little bit far out there, so just bear with me on this. Realized the intent was good with some of this, and then I realized that Game and Fish didn't identify some of these things as being an issue, but potentially in the future, I felt like they might. So first one would be work with Wyoming Game and Fish Department, transportation to target highest risk locations. I think you've done that. You're trying to identify those as it is. I think if we've done that, focus first on highways with known pronghorn movement, 191, I think you've already done that. And other key corridors in the area. Highway 28, once again, this was something, if we were to perceive in the future that those crossing projects might be a benefit, it would be something other than that. I think I would pull this recommendation because I don't think that currently it fits with what the biological risk assessment is actually stating. So, Mike,
just a question for Ken. Ken, your comments about railroad impacts in the county. Good question for you. Your comment about railroad impacts in your county where you got county road or highway underpass, overpass, and nothing on the railroad. Would it be then valuable to try to rope railroad management system into this kind of recommendation?
Particularly, I was quoting is not in this corridor, it's the original corridor for Wyoming Range. Near the Wyoming Range, my county, the deer, and they come down through that slot and they're getting the Antelope and so there's a lot of coloring already in that.
Just sound like it might be more of an issue to be consistent with this, but it isn't. This is what that's the question.
Okay. And as I say, I don't think there's any need for this as a recommendation moving forward. Something in discussions that we had and potential for future that early on I had written down as a potential. So I would pull it. I don't think there's any issue with it. The next one I would say install wildlife crossings paired with strategic fencing. That came out of conversations with several people. felt like that was something that was, a very important issue. Sounds as if those types of things have been very beneficial in the past. And so if we can do more of that and it can help, I think that would be something that we would really like to see. You know, it was very interesting to me to see the antelope going under the underpasses. Now they were as skittish as they were, but they were still willing to use those underpasses. And each time I see an antelope or a deer or an antelope or an elk, or I saw a raccoon hit on the road the other day, it bugs me. I hate that. I just hate seeing that shit on the road. So, I just think that if there are opportunities to put wildlife crossings in that are paired with strategic fencing, that's something that we will not. Comments? Okay, we vote on that. This came out of another of the conversations we had with the one-on-one with people. And not that it's not being done, incorporating digital signs warning drivers during peak migration periods. I think emphasizing that is important and that it is something that is effective. I think the more of that we can do during those periods, the better opportunity we have to eliminate vehicle crashes and the safety issue for humans, but also to help the animal population also. So I think just once again, supporting that concept of having those digital signs out there during those periods is important.
Also, that education recommendation.
Yeah. I think it fit in fairly closely with that. Okay. I would be fine with that. Rest of the group, I think, you know, doing that as an educational recommendation would be fine. So let's go ahead and do that. The next one I think we're already probably doing, coordinate corridor protection with future highway planning. I think, you know, in talking with DOT, I think that they do a really good job of that. I think the fish works with them. Not sure why this is on there. Perfectly honest with you. Not sure where I was when I wrote this one down, but I think it's already probably being done. So
Say, just for, you know, advocacy's sake, I mean, highway funding changes. That every, you know, the service transportation reauthorization funds changes every year. The discretionary grant opportunities change as well. And so I would say that just because something's happening now and we really like it, let's not ignore that, because future groups and future administrations will look at this document to find out what was working really well and that we should continue to do. So I think don't be afraid to support existing systems or existing collaborations or existing planning or existing priorities, because those will change over time. And I think if it's valuable to this group that there still remains a focus on, you know, continuing to coordinate this with YDOT, don't just let it go because it's small or it's definitely still happening, because future leadership definitely could not be happening. Yeah, so just keep that top of mind.
Right, if I can respond, and this relates to the digital signage. These are topics that you I think want to memorialize as important, not just for the wildlife side of the house, but for transportation. And I understand Sarah's point. I agree with it. If the working group thinks these are existing practices that have been beneficial, there's absolutely no reason not to say so and encourage the continued practice. I mean, I think it's good to have it. Even if it came out of the bureau.
yeah, it wasn't out of a beer, but it might have been out of a conversation at 2 o'clock in the morning somewhere. There were a lot of those conversations.
Overheated.
Well, I don't know, it warned us twice, so.
It's a trying to straight.
Who thinks it's worth more?
While we wait for that, let's go ahead and just take a 5-minute break. If anybody wants to stand up and shake a leg or get a drink or something. Greg, but I think we can get going again. We've got projection again. So we did not vote, I don't think, on that last recommendation. So voting on to coordinate corridor protection with future highway planning. Go ahead, vote with respect to that.
Okay.
Okay. Next, this is always something that I think is important, is trying to find ways to leverage partnerships and funding opportunities. And I think, you know, when I, once again, probably late at night, came up with this concept, you know, I think it's always good to try and collaborate. It's easier to come up with additional funding when you've got collaboration, you've got collaborative partnerships. So I think if there's a way that, any way that we can find to partner with federal agencies or NGOs and local governments to cost share projects, it's a benefit. I think also looking at any grants that could potentially be tied to wildlife vehicle collision reduction, is something that we could look at. Once again, not something that's really proving to be a huge issue at this point in time, but they are happening. Connectivity is obviously, you know, what we're trying to accomplish here. And then obviously the last point here is something that would be voluntary, but trying to engage private landowners where near where a highway is for adjacent habitat improvement. It's just keeping, once again, those lines of communication open and trying to get that volunteer cooperation and those partnerships. So once again, maybe not worded the best or good intentions with respect to this. Right. Try to get this. So, questions on it?
I think it was the Du Bois Wildlife Crossing project that required quite a lot of private land collaboration, right? To be able to make that work happen there. There's, can't remember, more than a dozen, I think, private landowners that are necessary to make a project like that happen. So I'm looking right at you, Jill, because you're shaking your head at me. Is that right? And
Yes, there's a lot of private land associated with the, separated.
And so can you just talk a little bit about like what was necessary with private land to be able to do a project like to make those crossing projects around Du Bois happen?
Yeah, I mean, we always try to work closely with the adjacent private landowners, to make sure that we're not putting a crossing structure in somewhere and creating a problem, dumping wildlife into a situation where they would not be welcomed on adjacent private land. So there's a lot of collaboration that goes on for planning any of those projects. Make sure we select structure location for fence design, in those projects in ways that works for everyone involved.
And once again, I think this is emphasizing, trying to continue with that practice. It's, once again, ongoing, and making everyone aware that we believe that it is a practice that needs to continue. Other questions? Okay, we can vote on this one. Next, we have lay down sections of right-of-way fences on areas where needed to get pronghorns from one side to the other, and using digital LED road signs to alert travelers of wildlife crossing during those time periods. John, and it was with John that the conversation about the digital signs came up that I kind of wrote that in. So I didn't want to steal his thunder, but I was just trying to make sure. I thought that was a great idea and didn't want to miss that.
So where I was going with this is, there's like three areas that come to mind up where I'm at. On 351, when they're trying to navigate that area by the New Fork River and get across, there's a lot of antelope in a small area that are crossing the highway. Plus digital sign can be really good there. On Highway 191, north of Farson, and I know that there's times of years that the antelope concentrations aren't big, but there is times when there's a lot of antelope using those lay down panels across. And digital sign would be good there. And then also on Highway 28 east of Farson, there's a small area where there's the double gates and that deal, that digital signs would be really helpful there. That's where I was going.
Excellent.
Can I ask a question? So I drove 28 from the green to Farson just Saturday. And I saw all the faded signs that you could still read barely about antelope migration across. When did that happen? Why did it only happen there?
When they paved that road. I don't know how long ago it was. When they paved that road, made it a highway, that was part of the project, I put those signs in.
Because I've never seen that anyplace else in the state, and I think it's a great idea.
I love those signs. That was a reference to antelope entering the road at 55 miles an hour. That's one of those
Yes.
signs. And then
Yes,
you got the sage.
I've never seen it there. First time I drove it in the right direction, I guess.
I love those signs. Every time I drive across that road, I think those are great.
Part of the agreement there was that those signs would be put in place, you know, but when they paved that road, there's also talk of putting in a fence. And so those signs are part of the agreement to avoid putting in a fence to, prevent some of the.
I was curious. Thank you.
We should go back to the first quick sentence.
So those are highway signs?
Like billboards on
Billboards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are probably, what, 6 of them?
There's some for safety. Safety routes for animals.
Yeah.
And cattle.
Okay, any other comments on that? I think it fits in, but I think it's an excellent recommendation that fits in with our others. I think we can move forward with it. Let's go ahead and vote on it. Okay. And last, we have identify opportunities and prioritize funding to address risk or conflict associated with road crossings. Meg,
There's a very general statement of everything we just talked about.
okay, and that's what we're trying to do. We talked about trying to come up with these broad ideas, so fits in very well with some of the others. Okay. I think if Mike, you're one, I think we go ahead and vote on it. So certainly in favor.
Okay.
All right.
What do you? So a lot of these are similar, and do you want to keep them a little bit separate, or you want me to try to combine them into? I did combine them initially, but I think I need more detail here. But I did just come up with sort of 2 briefer ones. We can certainly bolster these.
Sarah, for my part, the only reason to carve things out and be specific is if you're addressing it to an audience whose native document this isn't gonna be like white.
Okay.
And if it's a game and fish implementation oriented, game and fish multiple documents and things can be folded together. But really, if you're calling something out, asking somebody to do something whose core mission is not conservation, then having a simple bullet item might be useful.
Okay.
Just to support that emphasis.
Okay.
That's just my thought.
And I can definitely make these a little bit more detailed with some of those.
Other comments on that? Good point. All right, we have just a few more minutes before we're scheduled to have public comment, so let's go ahead into section 6, which would be recommendations on the executive order broadly. First, we've got better clarify the definition and requirements of a stopover area. Paraphrased once again from comments that Craig made.
Yeah, those next 2, again, based on this morning's presentation, so I'll withdraw those and
Okay.
understand them better.
I felt like it would be important. One thing that we've talked about a lot with respect to this is valid existing rights. I thought having a definition as part of the definitions there would be something that would make sense. So that was what I thought would be something that would, in addition to the executive order. So, comments on that?
I think that's good. We've experienced that firsthand a couple of years ago where pre-existing rights weren't understood by all the agencies and they fixed that. And we've been operating really smoothly, understanding But for the average person, I don't think that reading this lets them fully know. And we've gotten, we have several different slide decks that add more value to what that means. And I think listening to the hours of public comment and seeing all the written public comment, that the understanding of what designation will and will not do, I think ties a little bit back to understanding what valid existing rights are and aren't.
I found it very enlightening when Joe first started talking about the valid existing rights, something that was a concept that I wasn't really familiar with. I thought he did a great job with that, and I thought it was something that really helped me. So
I was wondering, is there a written outcome to that? As you said, it's like multiple state agencies agreeing on a common definition. If that was done, would that be something?
No, so it's really the state's definition of pre-existing rights. So if you took that over to BLM, that would not be the same. But who kind of moved the needle, or who makes that decision about who is authorized to state who has pre-existing rights for?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was a product that reflected.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I was wondering.
I think some of the materials that came from our presentations, I think Jill had a slide. There are a couple slides in here that added the value of more than just a plan, or they didn't even call it spacing units in the EO, but adds a little bit more color, because those terms to those federal government, that's different. So in that a plan can be an EIS, a ROD, and maybe even like the state agreement is.
I was just looking for a shortcut.
Yeah.
To what that definition might be.
Yeah,
Question.
the examples I think definitely help others, but I don't know how to.
He has a lot of examples. I just don't know how we'll better define this. Like what do you envision as a better definition than what's already provided in the executive order?
I think it's just putting it into the definitions themselves so that it's easy for someone to pick up, see, they're when talking about the concept of valid existing rights, this is what is being discussed. So.
But I don't think that that's bad to add more to what's happening in appendix E as those examples, because it's spelling out a lot of those examples, just not all of them. And that's kind of what we ran into. And so if all the people changed out, this document can walk on its own legs, and then form the next group of people. That's what we're trying to do. So there's a couple areas in that E. So like how I asked Joe today about federal units, we landed on in a couple of years ago that pre-existing oil and gas units were more around what you go through with docket spacing of the oil and gas commission. So this just gets down like into the weeds. But if you have agency folks that don't understand this part, it makes it hard for them to say, yes, you have pre-existing rights or not.
Yeah, it's stating they'll be recognized, but it's not really stating what they are. So I think a definition of what that is, and I think, I'm not sure. I think Joe could come up with that very quickly for us and come up with something that would fit very well.
Yeah, or just what pieces do you need to go E?
Yeah,
If
it could be added there, obviously, sure.
So is that something you'll reach out to Joe for, should provide us?
Well, I think once again, we're making a recommendation that that's something we think should be changed within it.
As opposed to us trying to do it.
Yeah, rather than us doing it. I think then, it would be up to, if the governor chooses to move forward with that recommendation, he would talk, I would think Joe would be the first group probably to reach out to and say, can you give me a definition for valid existing rights to put in with section 9 or with appendix E?
I think too, I could, follow up with Jasmine and Joe and ask, with this recommendation, there could be here, and these are the places that we think could be straight. And so.
Okay, go ahead and vote on whether we would like to do that or not. We're all okay. And then I had put in strengthen appendix B, section 8 on the scheduled review cycle. I think we talked about that in the recommendations, so we're fine with respect to that. We've got we're just past public comment, but we've just got a couple of other issues for discussion. And then once we've got the public comment, we can get back into the other section, which we had passed over, because we will have gotten through basically all of our recommendations. So it gives a pretty good idea of what we'll be working with, and give us the idea whether we want to move forward with a designation or stay with the identification. So issues for discussion, Mike can let you address those.
I mean, we've talked about most of them. I just had these as thoughts and never got to recommendations, but we did. Others covered a lot of them. You know, I think the one thing that's kind of an outlier still, which I'll wait to see the summaries from Sara. But that first one, you know, at some point is conflicts between the public that utilize those areas for recreation, like the bottleneck associated with mule deer. You know, eventually will it start putting the squeeze on recreation? And right now they're all happy-go-lucky because there's nothing really affecting them, at least from what I've heard. And so, you know, it's something that is in the back of my mind. But I think we've talked about everything else, and if there's something that comes up in my review, the summaries associated with those, I think you have some comments to that.
Yeah, excellent. Same thing, you know, I just in the comments that we had, I just jotted down a few things that I thought would be something that we definitely wanted to talk about. I think we've talked about all of the ones that I've referenced here. I don't think there's anything more that we need to do with respect to those comments. So with that, we're just a couple minutes late. And if we have members of our public who would like to comment, do we have the list at this point in time of people who have signed up that would like to comment?
Do you have anyone online that wants to comment? Okay.
There isn't anyone online. Okay, looks like currently we've got Dwayne Kerr. So Dwayne, if you'd like to come up. Sarah's gotten rid of our podium there, but we'll let you come to the front and address us.
Come to the front and please don't trip up. So nicely roll up here.
Gonna take a quarter. We can thank Dwayne Kerr and retired game warden. Had a 40-year career with the department, all in the Green River region, so I'm pretty familiar with what's going on here in discussion. Thank you for that speak earlier. You know, when you were part of the remembering some things that went on and will still go on. Type thing. One of the things that or some of the things I've talked about or thought about this might sound kind of odd. Talking about, we're trying to do things to promote pronghorn, make their populations good and things like that. Talking about things like overpasses, some structures and allow them easy passage across I-80 railroad tracks during hard winters. To me, that's probably not wise use of funds and that kind of stuff. I have a bunch of anecdotal experiences from my career, particularly in bad winters. But once pronghorn have a bad enough winter, they go someplace that they're not used to going. I've never seen them in the truck. Winter 78, 79, the January 79, there was this wasn't even Sublette. There was about 300 head of pronghorn crossed I-80 and got onto the right of way out of Tipton.
They worked their way around. I got called out there. The interstate was closed, so I made it out there without having to deal with traffic. But they had already found their way to the south side of the exit there, and those 300 Antelope headed south. There were never any pronghorn that came back and came up along the fence or anything like that the next spring. We had probably 2,000 head of antelope in the 78, 79 winter that crossed along the I-80 fence on the north side, just west of Green River along the Palisades there. 2,000 antelope going single file all day. Pretty interesting sight. If those antelope came back, we don't know how they got back. The 83, 84 winter, there were, again, this wasn't a Sublette problem, but the buck antelope died at the Rock Springs Golf Course. He had been collared, radio collared, the year before, 20 miles northwest of Rawlins, in a trapping operation there. Those storms in 83 started in early November, and they lasted for probably 2 or 3 weeks. And that pronghorn basically started in the area where he lived, where he was collared, northwest of Rawlins. He went west, with those storms pushing him. He died at the Rock Springs Golf Course. Those kinds of things there. In bad winters, pronghorn have to move. Building an overpass might be a nice thing, but if they go across the interstate and head south, most likely we'll never see them come back. So they probably died within sight of the interstate fence, and people will see that. That's just the way things are. Some other things. One of our problems right now, we don't have anything to do about it. It's a long-term drought. This has been going on since, in my opinion, the mid-80s. We're just getting less and less precipitation. If we had decent precipitation in lots of years, a lot of the talk about habitat improvements, things like that, doing things that will benefit pronghorn in some of these crucial winter ranges and things. Precipitation falling out of the sky without that means there's nothing we can do about that. And then just paying attention to the starting times on some of the bad storms. There's nothing to do with that information either, other than late October, early November, stormy periods that start with sideways snow and those types of things. It helps to know that that's probably going to cause you a really tough situation later on. Again, there's not much we can do about that. Overall, acknowledging that wildlife and pronghorn conservation, things like that. When we talk about multiple use, to me, conservation of our natural resources like wildlife fits in with a multiple use. When the Rock Springs RMP was going on, that was brought up, that conservation should be considered one of the uses of multiple use. People that came out against that shocked me. The people thought that conservation did not belong in that framework. I bet the difference. And hopefully, the idea that folks can hopefully speak for the pronghorn, they have the voice and they try to tell us that we don't slow on the uptake sometimes. We don't know what they're saying. But through all the movements and timings and things like that, they're trying to tell us things. If we can think about those kinds of things and speak for them, that's going to help. And partly because it's the right thing to do.
Dwayne, thank you for your comments. And thanks for helping us earlier today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for letting me.
Next, Megan Riley.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Megan Riley. I'm Wyoming Outdoor Council and very much enjoyed being a fly on the wall today. I really appreciated the thoughtful conversations that went on. I think you all are coming up with some great recommendations. I did want to share my own thought on the discussion around buffers and existing infrastructure. It sounds like there were a couple of ideas that emerged potentially. a mapping exercise to take out some infrastructure where there isn't usable habitat, or strengthening language around valid existing rights within the EO. And I just want to propose a third idea that I came up with that's kind of another mapping exercise that you could consider that would allow retention of the accepted line buffer method that came up with the footprint of the corridor. I mean, one idea could be to create an additional layer in the corridor map that shows where those valid existing rights for significant infrastructure, however that's defined, or however people come up with that, but then that's something that can be toggled on and off, but it doesn't take away from the scientific method that's sort of accepted within the scientific community. So not my place to decide what direction you'll take with that, but just a third idea as you grapple with what to do. So thanks for letting me participate today.
Any questions for Megan? Megan, once again, thank you. We had conversations with you over the last couple of weeks, and some of the information that you brought forward to us, I think was very valuable, and we appreciate your cooperation with us and your trying to help us in making these decisions. Thanks. And we have got, I believe it's Joy, is it Buford?
I don't have clear comments. Joy, I've spent the majority of the last 20 years in the recreation on the Delbert Chapter. And I know that two of you have spent time in the backcountry and off the main roads, but how many of you have actually gone and driven around that loop, or actually looked where the pronghorn migrate? Because I can tell you where they are, where they herd up. Has anyone here actually gone, like really looked for? Good for you. Thank you. It's it may seem like a little blip on most of these maps, but this is Quebec Basin is really important area, and there's and first of all, I do not have Gmail, so I could not comment on your website. So now you get to listen to me ramble. I think you should just accept an email. I have very poor wireless access. I'm not gonna put it through the box. I like highway signs. I was thinking when you were talking about signage, you know, when you drive down a designated scenic road, why not just have, why not put up some signs saying, you know, you're following the trail of the path of the pronghorn, whatever you one a comment that I heard from a lot of people that I talked to her, that they are really interested in this issue. They're much more local. And you mentioned having commissioners get involved, maybe. I think planning and zoning. I'm thinking about Sublette County right now. There's a new P&Z administrator, and the previous, and I saw Mr. Schultz at that EQC hearing. There's a contested gravel mining pit permit, small mining operation permitted and being contested for large. In the time since that permit was approved to mine what the owner says is he hopes to get 1 million yards of gravel. out of that bench facing the back river, if that is private property where those.
Ms. Suffer, we've asked for people to try and limit to like 3 minutes, so if you could just kind of
Oh, I'm sorry.
push things forward.
Well, this is my only chance, so.
Yeah, and I'll give you a little attitude here, so.
I think, okay, I think, speaking with, planning and zoning is really important. Our county policies have, kind of a little escape route for not having to get a conditional use permit. I think DEQ maybe somehow needs to be connected in. Mr. Schultz brought updated information on the Sublette problem that was not available at the time that they made comments to Scott Evans about his project. And the only time that I've heard the update referred to was in that congested hearing EQC. But it didn't seem to phase property owner at all. He just wants to take a million yards of gravel.
Mrs. Efford, we have, through our recommendations, we are trying to incorporate the use of our land use departments, and things of that nature. So we will be doing that in the recommendations
Great.
as we move forward. So I thank you very much for your comments and your participation.
And I'd like to see a micro mini local.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to comment? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, wait, just jump up real quick. Thanks. Thanks. I'm Matt Cosacrio. I'm with Greater Yellowstone Coalition. I appreciate, as Megan said, the dialogue today has been really encouraging. There was an awful lot, I think, suggested from everyone about prioritizing funds and making funds available. Mike mentioned sort of a clearinghouse for funding availability. And again, this is sort of similar to a comment that I made at the last meeting, but a way to increase access to federal funding for private landowners or producers that are on public land grazing leases is to get this corridor designated. We've talked about like having the state prioritize something or other. There's no louder or clearer prioritization message that the state could send than a designation. We are the state. So I think by moving that forward, all we'll do is increase access to funding and opportunity for people that care about pronghorn, but also care about whatever conservation projects, water, whatever that they might want to do on, again, private land or public land grazing. So I appreciate it.
Thanks. Questions from that? Thank you. Anyone else? All right, there being no further public comment, we'll get back into our recommendations. We can move back to section 4. We had gotten 2, I believe, couple of different recommendations. So, and I think the next one that we have would be a recommendation that I brought forward, and this would be my attempt at trying to formulate a recommendation to the governor on whether to designate or not based on the current threat level. So my attempt at this was a recommendation that the local working group finds that existing protections are important, but not by themselves sufficient to ensure long-term functionality of the Sublette Antelope Migration Corridor. The group recommends designation paired with a voluntary first implementation strategy for private lands, recognition of valid existing rights, continued grazing and agricultural use, and site-specific management focused on bottlenecks, stopover areas, and future surface disturbance. The real question is not whether antelope can survive today, but whether the corridor remains functional long-term. So that was my attempt. That was how I felt the group should move forward. And I think this is going to be one where we will have a lot of discussion. So entertain discussion with respect to that recommendation. Maybe not. No discussion.
High use.
High use,
Oh, the high use isn't shown in your list of focus areas, should it be?
it should be certainly. I would add high use to those. Current threat areas.
I'm concerned with the pair with a voluntary first implementation strategy for private companies. I'm a little concerned with the paired with a voluntary first implementation strategy for private lands. And just making sure that, you know, our directive isn't to restrict those private lands. And so just maybe the wording a little bit.
Okay.
Um,
I'm fine with wordsmithing.
Okay, and then I'm still at a 3 for recommending using designation.
Okay, that's fair. Other comments? Please, Mike.
I'm not clear either what voluntary first implementation strategy means, so that's a question. I support this. I support a full designation. I think it's in looking through the constraints on development, on public lands. There's an awful lot of flexibility there, and there's more flexibility I heard today than just the words on the paper. And wildlife is suffering death by 1,000 cuts. Development proposals and development industries fear death by 1,000 cuts, additional considerations and implementing other issues that have to be dealt with. And I understand that. I've had to try to navigate that in my career. From my perspective, the recommendations that are here are largely that. We have a great deal more flexibility technologically to avoid high value resource areas that we necessarily always employ, usually because it's going to cost something. From my perspective, I'm not speaking for industry or as their lawyer. A resource that's economically developable, I don't believe is going to be phased by the constraints that are present here in the implementation language. So personally, I understand and respect the concern about economic development. I don't think this would preclude economic development personally in any meaningful manner. I would hope that we would support it wholeheartedly. So I'm not one.
Let me go back, and when I phrased voluntary first implementation, my point was that on private lands, it would be strictly voluntary, and which is certainly a part of the executive order. Maybe voluntary first is not terminology. I understand where you're fighting that. So I don't have any problem at all with wordsmithing that a little bit. If somebody would like to make an amendment to that, I would be fine with that. Or certainly, you know, Sarah and I can work on that if it's determined that this is the way we want to go. Other comments?
Is there a reason to not include medium and low use as well? Or are you saying that these are just like focus areas or bottlenecks? I mean, medium and low use take up a huge portion of the board.
They do, but the impact is so minimal with respect to those areas. I didn't think there was that important to reference those also.
Okay.
Can I ask that? Certainly, you're saying focus on that's not writing off or Xing out.
No, certainly. No, they would certainly be included.
Look at these. This is the highest priority to look at.
Yes. And the concept would still be designating the full 8 segments that are within the charge.
I guess my question is more about is there too much, is there too much detail in this recommendation for phone conversation, or does it need to be a little bit more simplified for the question of designation?
I liked it. You know, I hope that we will include a statement of findings or whatever we can come up with. They can be our findings recommended to the governor. The governor can accept them or modify them as he sees fit. I liked a short, concise, which I think this is, of course, I'm a lawyer. Statement that wraps it up.
I felt pretty good about this until I found out he was a lawyer.
Yeah, actually, I think it needs a lot of work, but I'm willing to live with that.
That's better.
No, to me, it encompasses what we have been talking about. And so I liked it for that. But that's just me. I've never met a detail that couldn't be elaborated on.
I'm not married to the language. I just think it conveyed the concept, and I tried to, once again, come up with something that covered it fully, but certainly wasn't too verbose. So that's fine. Maggie, you started. Like, you want to say something again?
Well, I think maybe, if we are getting into details, it might be important to include designation of like the east segment. If we're getting into certain details.
Well, that's what our charge was to do it for the 8 segments. So I took that for granted. That would be the case, but
I'm struggling with the specificity versus statements that we need to accomplish with the statement, I guess.
Designation is proposed. Just adds 2 words. See, I'm speaking before.
there you go. Hey, I like having an attorney.
Well, maybe calling out some of the specifics within it, just as value to, the longer version of the recommendations. Right, and some of the key points of why we would maybe get to that consensus or not. That's nothing. So like on the flip side, if I were saying, didn't recommend designation, I would maybe fine tune to the major benefit or gain we would see would be funding recognition. And that maybe the functionality is already identified. And the rest of these recommendations are mostly happening already and adding emphasis to them or fine tuning. So, with your designation one, yes, pre-existing rights are very important to recognize. The continued grazing and agriculture, very, important to recognize. But maybe we were getting into these management focused areas, bottlenecks, stopovers, and maybe the high use. Like maybe this needs a little bit of everyone's ideas back in.
Yeah, no, as I say, I mean, this was a concept to move forward. I'm happy to, and I think, we can certainly vote on this. If the vote comes back that we need to have significant wordsmithing on it, we've got time between now and our next meeting to look at this. Try and come up with what is going to be that full recommendation at that point. So no different than what we're doing with respect to the other recommendations which we made. And that was why I felt it was important. I wanted to have the full body of work on what the recommendations were before we tried to look at this.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Jasmine, maybe this is a statement. Full content of which is elaborated on, balance the recommendation that follow. Do you want to tie them in? Because there's going to be more detail for various of these aspects there. That might be a way to go, just to recognize this as the overarching statement that there's more content in life provided elsewhere and should be interpreted in light of the balance of the recommendations. Something like that might help. It's that other, how do you keep it short enough so people don't fall asleep while reading it without losing nuance of content? And hopefully the rest of the description, their recommendations will combine some of that. And that might be a way that you get comfortable with the language. Just if that's your intent.
Yeah, I certainly, as I say, when I was trying to put these things together, I was trying to come up with, the concept, if we're going to convey the message that there are enough protections in place, how would we structure the recommendation? Because once again, this is the recommendation that's going to the governor, that's coming from a group that he's convened of stakeholders to try and give him the best advice that he can. And I was trying to come up with a way to do that with each one of these. This was the way that I felt that we should move, and it was what I came up with, as that first recommendation. As I say, I'm more than happy to have other people, wordsmith it. If the concept is that we do want to move forward with designation, if that's all we want to put into the recommendation, then that's fine. It's just whatever this group feels is the best method of conveying that message to the government. And that can't come directly from me. It's got to come from this group. Well, I would say at this point in time, let's vote on this. We'll see how the vote comes down along the lines. And that will give us an idea of how we want to move forward in the next meeting. Let's go ahead and vote on this.
Three, one, three, two, three. Okay. Yeah, you have enough threes that would probably want to keep working on it. And that, I think that if we can't, if we have threes and no fours, which is how things work out, we can move forward if the majority of members still agree. And I think also with this being the framing recommendation, there might be some needs for, some statements that accompany this if we end up going that direction, things that would need to be considered. But ultimately, think about, you're at three right now, what kind of recommendations would need to be considered to move to two or one on this, to support this recommendation. If there isn't anything, think about what your reservation statement may be that we need to work along with the recommendation, just based on the spicy. And we didn't do the Google Doc where everyone was like writing their comments all in one, but this may be something where we might want to give a little bit of time for some written feedback and then incorporation and written feedback again, so you guys have a chance to work this before I was.
I'm very sympathetic to the issues with Google Docs. They're startled for me also, and for others, the general public. If we get into doing that, if we could perhaps pursue it in a Word doc format, it's just more accessible. I get the reasons for using Google Docs. But like I say, for me, they're a challenge. I'm sure they are friends.
Yeah, I think we could find a way to, at least facilitate some feedback.
Yeah, just something that I don't want you to have to sit down and collate 10 different sets of comments into a single one. I get that part of it. But compare, right, and that sort of thing can help get there.
Okay. Great.
I'm just a Luddite.
Companies don't support Google Docs.
I am a Luddite, and I'm proud of it.
Okay.
All right, well, I think that gets us through the recommendations phase today for what we're looking at. I think we got a little further than what I anticipated we would, which I think was great. I love the dialogue back and forth which we had with respect to these. I think that we can move forward with making these amendments that we've talked about. So I would envision in our next meeting, we will, Sara and I will have the opportunity to go through, try and put together some of the recommendations so that they are combined. Bring them forward so that we can have final deliberations at the next meeting. And hopefully get this all done, which brings to mind, when are we going to do our next meeting? And we sent out a poll to see what would be the best day for our next meeting. And what we found out was there wasn't a great day. And so it was pretty well split as to what days would work. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Sarah, we felt like May 29th was probably going to be our best opportunity. It seemed like there was a problem, for someone on each of we brought forth May 29th, June 1st and June 2nd. And there were certainly conflicts for everyone, at one of those dates or another. So I would ask if that would be the will of the group to do our 5th meeting on June 29th. Or excuse me, May 29th. I just said June 1st and 2nd. Trying to get this year over with. So no, May 29th.
The 29th works for me.
Works for me.
Okay, works for me.
Yes.
I'm seeing no one that it doesn't work for, other than it's gonna be really hard on me, but that's all right. I'll be here, so.
Does
Do you want to have it at a different location?
No, it's not really gonna make a difference. I'm
I don't know yet.
I'm going to a graduation in Texas. I'm not getting back until late the night of the 27th. So it'll be morning of the 28th when I get back, but I'll be fine. I'll just, it's gonna be, I'll have to coordinate with Sarah via virtual means while I'm gone to Texas, but it'll be fine.
Maybe we can have it in Rock Springs.
We could, if it would be something that the rest of the group felt would be fine to do it in Rock Springs.
I mean,
Game and Fish doesn't like that idea.
What about harder logistically with, like food and things like that we found last
Okay.
night, but we worked around it.
What about our one county commissioner? Is that gonna work for?
For Mark,
Yeah.
what was his answer on the Google poll?
His answer was yes.
Oh, yeah, what he sent me a message that he was going to make that meeting regardless of when it was, so
Okay.
he was adamant he would be here for the next meeting. So let's go ahead and plan it for here, logistical work, the additional drive for me is not that big a deal, so.
Where's here, please?
I know.
Do you want to try and do it here at the Weed and Pest Building again, is that?
Would you like to see if we can get the Levinson?
I don't know anything about
In the
Ruffin
library.
County, so whatever.
I have looked every time and they have never had the entire day available. I can look again, certainly for this new date. But there have been like a couple hours every afternoon or something where it was already booked. But,
So if we set the date for the 29th, we'll plan for 8 o'clock in the morning, and let's say it will be Pinedale. But at the location to be announced as soon as we can.
We have a large conference room, but I don't know if it would be neutral enough, but it's enough for if you would like. I mean, it's right next to 4-H.
Was this not good?
Oh, this is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just giving you another option.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know, I just didn't know if we could use this during the week still, if they're, I mean, cause that's a Friday, Jill, so off the. might be.
yeah, they're not here today for me to check with them
Yeah.
on room availability. I should be able to do that in the next couple of days.
If we went to the Levitt room, then we'd have room for people to sit down comfortably, and then we have better access for lunch.
Yeah, if you have that room only, I think.
I'm checking the availability right now for the location.
Yeah, we can just follow back up on the location and if Commissioner Bernard can help us. that'd be awesome.
Yeah, trust the arms.
No one listens to me.
Anything
All right,
else?
yeah, anything else that anyone would like to bring forward today? I think it was an excellent meeting. I think was really very impressed with the way everyone interacts with one another. I think this is an excellent move forward with, and I appreciate that. So
Any idea when you can have some information back out to us via voting form?
I'll try to work on that before the end of the week, get these recommendations, the changes back to you, and then ones that we can work on before Friday.
great if I have a commissioners meeting on Tuesday, like bounce it off them.
Well, look, that's doing that, yeah, that's not recent, times.
All right, with no further business, we're adjourned.
Thanks so much. Drive safe.
Oh, yeah. So what did they?